What do you do when the foundations of your world crumble beneath you and you're standing amidst the ruins of your dreams? How do you find the strength to rebuild, redefine, and claim your life? Today on LifeJack, the Resilience Podcast, I have the extraordinary Deborah Rudell, whose life story is a testament to the human spirit's incredible capacity for resilience and reinvention. From navigating the challenges of being a single mother and enduring 2 divorces to experiencing profound spiritual disillusionment, Deborah has faced life's upheavals with grace and grit. Her journey from a small town in British Columbia to becoming a university professor and the author of her memoir, Grit and Grace, The Transformation of a Ship and a Soul, is filled with lessons on resilience, creativity, and finding one's path in the world. Join us as we dive into her remarkable story and discover the wisdom she has gathered along the way.
Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were life-jacked.
Hi, Deborah. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
I am excited, and thank you, Dr. Rowe, for having me on your program.
Yes, it's most certainly a pleasure. Now, Deborah, could you take us back to your early years in British Columbia and kind of share the share a little bit about your upbringing that helped to shape your perspective on resilience?
Yes, well, I was the oldest of 4, which happened a lot in the 50s and 60s. And being the eldest of 4 with really close siblings, I ended up having to grow up really fast and help my mom with the little ones. And part of that was that when things went on in my life, I had to figure it out myself. So that was a pretty big shaping factor. Another factor was that I had a grandmother who started talking to me when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 about reincarnation, about karma, about my soul, about energy. So this was a pretty formative thing to happen early on. And this gave me tools to look at life from for the rest of my life, like a perspective, a groundwork that was unique.
Yes. So do you think that the way that you looked at resilience initially in your childhood, has it evolved at all now as an adult?
I hope so. On one level, it's the same. I'm still looking at the big picture and finding ways to go inside and ways to navigate what's happening to me in my life as a lesson and to learn from. And I think as time's gone by, I'm wiser. I don't get thrown off whack so much. I think that there's a little more grace around, oh, this is life, this is a bump in the road rather than, the end of the world.
I think that is true to everyone. As we get older, we start recognizing certain events in our lives. We're able to handle them a little bit better, whether it's events in our lives or people. It just seems like as you get older, you just don't worry about things as much.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Right. Most definitely.
When people say they wish they were 20 again, I'm really not in that camp. I really enjoy having a little more perspective and wisdom to navigate through these rough times.
I can attest to that as well. For sure.
Yeah.
Now, you face significant life changes. such as becoming a single mom at a young age. Now, of course, children are a blessing no matter when they come into our lives and when they come into the world. However, when you're younger, especially when you don't plan to be a mother or you're not exactly financially ready or equipped to be a parent, it can be kind of difficult. And it almost feels like that is a life-jacked moment. Although, like I said, children are a blessing, but it can feel very much like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now, right? So,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. So how did you find the strength to navigate this early on? I mean, did you have a support system, or was it just that, you know what, you got pregnant, you're out on your own?
I had baby daddy was with me for about 7 months after he was born. So I had a little bit of time where I wasn't on my own, but then I was on my own. And it was kind of a shock in some ways, but on another way, I had, kind of talked to myself to build up my confidence of what I would have to do. What I didn't realize was how much it costs to do everything. So I did end up going into, a welfare office to get some support. And it was so humiliating and so horrible that I just determined right there I would never go in that place again, ever, ever, ever. And I would get it together.
It's interesting that as human beings, essentially that is our job. I mean, that's why we find a partner, right? We find a partner to mate, to populate the earth, right? And so,
yes.
I mean, no matter how, life, you create life, whether planned or unplanned. But it's interesting that if you don't have the money and you do have to go apply for assistance, why is it that they make you feel dirty? Like, I haven't had that experience personally, but I've heard that from many people that when they have to go and apply for assistance, they just make you feel so ashamed when, as humans, it's natural. We're supposed to populate the earth and be, as they say, be fruitful and multiply. But then sometimes it doesn't all fall into place exactly how you want it to.
No, it really doesn't. And it really was quite a shock to me, because when I went in that welfare office, there was a bunch of young guys in there, which is weird, and there I was with this baby, and somehow, it wasn't okay. So it was quite a turning point in my life to really, get that picture that, okay, you're not coming back in this room. No way.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, you are a member of the Rajneesh Param religious community in Oregon, which has been described as a true utopian community. I mean, it was the idealistic, type of, like I said, utopian community that everyone would want to be in. Of course, it's no longer around, but how did you become a member of this community? And when you found this community, what was the initial experience like for you?
Thank you for describing it as a true utopian community. That's really wonderful, because a lot of times people start that off pretty controversially, but I really appreciate that you called it that, because it really was. And to answer your question, I became a member because we were sannyasins. We'd already taken sannyas with Bhagwan, which means that you were a disciple and you wore a mala and you wore red clothes. And when Bhagwan left India to come to America, he started this ranch in Oregon. And the ranch people called my husband and asked him if he would come down and be their dentist. And my husband replied, yes, but only if Debbie can come too. So yes, they said I could come. So that's how I ended up there. And then the initial experience was really, really difficult. I can't lie about that. And I do write about it in my story. When you grow up in our culture, there are certain things that are just normal. You just grow up with habitual ways to respond to things, habitual ways to live, to do things. And when you shake that up, it's quite a shock. Now, I can give a little story here. There's a story somebody tells about fish in the ocean. And one fish swims by two other fish, and asks them, how's the water? And the two other fish say, what's water? So that's what I mean by having, we're in this world and we grow up with a nuclear family and we live in a house and we go grocery shopping and we drive around in cars. These things are all normal. You get into a community like I went into, and all of a sudden it's set up like a kibbutz. The men live in one place, the women live in another place, the kids live in another place, and you just do your job. You don't cook, clean, drive, get gas, get groceries, none of that. Other people do all that. All you do is your job. So it was quite a shock at first.
So shortly after you were there, however, you experienced what some would call a spiritual disillusionment while there. So first of all, could you kind of explain to the listeners who may not know what exactly is a spiritual disillusionment?
Okay. So, and before I answer that, I'm just going to say that I was fully immersed and fully participating and happy to be there for 4 years. The disillusionment didn't happen until Bhagwan left. So that's when the disillusionment happened. Now, disillusionment, I'll give you an example. Bhagwan called a press conference, the end, and all these people came, like there was thousands and thousands of people and press from all over the world. And he was speaking about why Sheila had left. Now, Sheila was his secretary and the head of the branch. And when he was speaking, he wasn't telling the truth. And I happened to know that because I worked in Sheila's house. So I knew kind of what went on in her house, and what Bhagwan was saying didn't match. Now, the spiritual disillusionment comes in when I was thinking of this person as this really ideal person who always says the truth, has our highest spiritual good in his heart and in his mind, is only about the light and the love. Like, that's the idea I have in my head. And to hear someone who was my teacher lie in front of all those people was hugely, like, it was such a shock. And I went to stand up, and I have to say this, but I went to stand up, and because it was such a controversial situation, there was really high security. So we had the Peace Force, which was the city's police force. We called them the Peace Force. They were armed with Uzis around the outside of the whole perimeter of this big meeting hall. And I knew that they were there because a lot of the local people were there and wanting to be violent towards Bhagwan. They really didn't like us red people. And I had to look around, and my friends were pulling on my arm, don't stand up, because if there was any kind of disturbance in the crowd, then there was a chance for violence because the tensions were so high. So in that moment, I didn't stand up, even though I knew he lied, so I had a double whammy. I was really disturbed that my teacher and the person I looked up to had lied, and I was really freaked out about myself, who I thought was a person with a lot of integrity, and I did not stand up. I stayed silent. So part of the reason for writing this book, I'm going to segue into another section here, was because it is I'm wanting to speak up, to talk.
Oh, wow. And we'll get to your memoir a little bit later in the conversation. So how did you begin to rebuild your inner framework? Because, of course, when you had the inclination to stand up because you were like, this is not right, that's not true. And so you kind of had an inner conflict, like a betrayal almost, right? Because you're someone who is spreading untruths and within the community that you at one point in time felt very safe to be in. So how did you begin to rebuild your inner framework? Because anytime we experience a moment of distrust or betrayal, something in us gets broken, right? There's a link broken somewhere. And sometimes it can be developing trust with other people. And so you have to kind of work on yourself, right, to be able to trust again or build intimate relationships with a person again. So what did you do to rebuild
That's
your
right.
inner? Yeah, what did you do to rebuild your inner framework?
Yes, and I have to say that while I knew he lied and I didn't know what was going on, it took a long time and it took quite a bit of space, like several years, to really understand what had happened to me. And during that time, the one thing that I was doing was when anybody mentioned God or spirituality, I had to tell myself, no, that was a failed experiment. So for several years, every time I wanted to find solace in, oh, there's a bigger picture, or God will take care of that, or, oh, my faith. Anytime I wanted to go to do that, I stopped myself and reminded myself that I had tried that. I'd given up everything for it, and it had failed. And I did that for several years, and it was really hard.
Okay.
And then, yeah. And the other thing about those 2 years was it took a couple of years to reintegrate into society. We've been living with the goal for all of humanity and for peace on the whole of the earth, and how to grow our own food and live together without money and greed and climbing on each other to get ahead, and living in a different way, living together cooperatively, helping each other, building something that we could all blossom together with and in. And when we came out, all of a sudden there was just, my husband and me and our kids, and it was like so narrow and short-sighted. Like, how do you start living just for what do I want? Like, it was really hard to make that switch. So those are the first two things I had to do for a few years before I could actually start growing and healing.
No, I understand that. And so in part of that healing, you decided to move to Kauai in Hawaii. And
yes,
you began rebuilding an old boat. So, which
yes.
sounds like a transformative experience. I mean, of course, you're transforming a boat, and it seems like anytime we want to go through a sort of transformation in our lives, it's almost like we also transform something else around us. For you, in your instance, it's an old boat. So how did this time contribute to your healing and growth?
It was amazing. And again, in hindsight, I didn't know at the time. It just unfolded over the 4 years that we were working on that project. And first of all, I want to just mention that Kauai historically, and I mean ancient history, is known as the healing island. The people did not live on Kauai. That was the island where the shamans and the kings and queens went for their healing and sacred ceremonies. So I didn't know that at the time, but I've learned that since. So we moved there, and here we were building this boat. Now, there's a few things about building a boat. You're right. It's transformative inside and out. That's true. But it takes really a lot of time. There's a lot of sanding, a lot of varnishing, a lot of painting, and each thing takes a long time. For example, one mast is 65 feet long. It took me 5 days. Like, these are full days. These are 8-hour days sanding to finish one mast, just the sanding. So that's a very repetitive, monotonous job.
Sounds like
and you've got your earplugs in, because, earmuffs. We didn't have headphones back then so much. So I had ear protection because I was using, an orbital sander, and there was a big generator and all. So I had ear protection, and you just are in this zone. And I think in that zone, that was almost like a helpful meditative space to help my mind start unraveling this yarn of my life that had become quite tangled and involved, and start looking at where I'd been, why I had been there, what had I done there, was it worth it, Was it really true? Was I really misguided? And was I really I called myself like stupid or something, that I didn't know right from wrong and I couldn't tell a charlatan from a true, a man of truth? There were those kind of questions, deep questions. And I had a lot of time and space to give myself to think about it without getting uptight. You know how you get into tough questions and you get tight. When I was standing and varnishing, I would hit a tight spot and use just varnishing and it would come up again and I could go a little deeper. So that was how building the boat really, really helped. And I think another aspect of this is that being on a spiritual path, we're in the energetic world a lot, kind of in those days, pretty airy-fairy. Do you know that expression?
No.
When people they're not real grounded. They're kind of flighty and just off in la la land, being all spiritual love bunnies. So I think there was an element of working on the boat where I had to get really grounded. I had to be on the ground, what I could touch, what I could feel, what was real, hard, solid, Newtonian physics, if you want to go that way, like the material world for real. And I think working on the project also really brought me down into this material world a lot more.
Now, it seems like that nature plays a crucial role in your life journey. From being in Oregon in the Rajneesh Param community, which Oregon is a beautiful state full of beautiful landscape, and then moving to Kauai, which is a healing island, and that island nature is very healing. And so it seems like that the natural world is very nurturing to you. Do you think that is the case? And what does the natural world really do for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I come from British Columbia in the middle of the winter. So I ended up in Kauai in a boatyard where it's tropical, and we lived on the water and we were working on the water, and you're standing and varnishing and the trade winds are blowing through. So you're never super hot, even though it's sunny and warm. The trade winds are always blowing. And at the end of every day, my son and I would leave the boatyard a bit before my husband, and we'd go back to where we lived, which was, I just have to tell you where we lived, because it's now the Marriott in Kauai, in Lahui, but it was the Westin Kauai of, the Leech, rich and famous. It was this incredibly richy resort, and there were these condos that were out on the cliffs that were grandfathered into the resort property. So these little condos had been out there for, since the 40s. And we happened to know one of the owners who lived in Vancouver. And so we were renting out there on the cliffs out there in this incredibly luxurious place. So it was really wonderful where we lived. But we'd come home from work, from the boatyard, and all the sawdust and the noise, and my son and I would go and swim across the bay and just wash all the sawdust off of us and swim in the sea and see sea turtles. And yes, we saw sharks, but they were hammerhead sharks that couldn't bite us. It was quite lovely. It was really lovely life.
Wow. Now let's get to your memoir, Grit and Grace, the transformation of a ship and a soul. And so this memoir chronicles your life experiences. So what was the inspiration for you to decide, I want to bear it all and I want to share it in a memoir to the world? Because that's incredibly, that's a lot of courage. It's incredibly brave.
Yes, and I didn't, when I started writing, it wasn't like I'm going to tell all and bear it to the world. It really wasn't like that. It was more like I had this inner niggling, like, you need to write your story down. And I was like, yeah, sometime, yeah. And then one day, it was 10 years after we did the crossing, I ran into a guy on the beach in my hometown, And he heard about the boat and the project, and he asked me questions. And when I was answering, he said, you need to write this down. And I said, yeah, sometime. And he goes, no, you need to write this. And I said, well, I don't really know where to start. He said, start anywhere. Doesn't matter where. Start anywhere. Start tonight. So I made him a promise I would start. So that night I went home and I wrote the very first beginning of the book, which is called The Gale. And I wrote that down, and that was the start. And then I just started writing. And it took a long time, and I ended up, joining a writing group and all of that. And as that went on, then I saw I had a story. Like, it wasn't just about building a boat. It was about the ranch. It was about what happened with Bhagwan. It was about being in Sheila's house and knowing that my teacher had lied to me. And it was about the things I had to face to reintegrate into the world in a very real way and become grounded. I hadn't started writing knowing that. I promise you. So,
you finished? Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, as far as what I hope readers will take away from my story, first and foremost, that about freedom. Freedom is the most important thing to me, and I don't just mean freedom to, run around on the world and do what you like. I mean freedom on the inside. So no matter what is happening, you have a sense of yourself and you can respond authentically to the world and the people around you. To me, that's freedom. Part of that is, learning when you're stuck or when you're blaming someone instead of taking responsibility. For example, in the ranch, Bhagwan was blaming Sheila, and then all of a sudden Yasins blame Sheila even today. And a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. And to me, that's really sad because they had an opportunity for their freedom. And instead of looking at their own involvement at the ranch and with the spiritual master, they have this sort of little out. Oh, I can just blame so-and-so. And that's really sad. That's the illusion. That's the darkness. If you want freedom, you have to find your place in it. No scapegoat, no blaming, even if it looks perfectly reasonable. So I really hope that people can see that. And if people are involved in a spiritual group and have sort of a story about it, like a blaming thing, that is a trap. And I pray and hope, and that's my dream, that people can find their way around and through that into true freedom and accept those challenges of having a scapegoat as a tool that teaches them even more about freedom, and they can get even more of their own connection to the divine.
Yes, I understand that. And freedom is an important right. People don't understand that freedom, it is the power or the right to speak, to act, to change even as you want without any hindrance or restraint, right? You can believe what you want,
right?
Feel what you want, you can do what you want, you can say what you want within reason. Because we know certain people of our nation and of our world like to just say random things and just say anything. And it's like, whoa, don't say that, because that can just cause lots of chaos and confusion.
And that's discernment. That's discernment. And we have to learn that too.
But you really can't put a price on freedom, can you? I mean, freedom is the ultimate existence. At least I believe so.
Yes, and there's so many levels of it, and we're dealing with all the levels right now in our world. Like, the freedom, even in our cultures, people don't even have freedom to get a job that they want or not, or work at this or that if you're a man or a woman, or if you're this color or that color. There's all kinds of external physical things that don't allow freedom. And at the same time, on another level, there's also the inner freedom, which I think by going for the inner freedom, you can do the alchemy to handle whatever's going on the outside with freedom. Does that make sense?
Sure. For sure. Now, of course, earlier we talked about the loss of a community, right? That the betrayal and, recognizing that someone that you trusted is sharing untruths, and you left the community, and in leaving that community, it is a loss, right? It is a loss of a support system that you had for several years. So, and I know that support systems are very important, especially with being resilient and going through life, especially when you're experiencing life-jacked moments. So how did you find, or did you have to create a new support network once you left the ranch?
Yes, I did have to create a new support network. And I'll just say right out of the get-go that there is something that happens when thousands of people, and at its peak, Rajneesh Param had 10,000 people. Now, 10,000 people with a shared goal and a shared, way of living and wanting to give back to the world, a shared commitment to cooperation, that creates an energy field that's like a huge, powerful bubble. And in my world, we call that the Buddha field. And when I left the ranch, I had to learn to live without that Buddha field. And I still am living without that. I have never found anything that has recreated that. And there is sadness with that. That's a loss and a mourning. And at the same time, to go back into community, we all have our shadows still. So there's still going to be things that happen in struggles for power, struggles for prestige, struggles to be better than the other person, to climb on other people. We all have those shadow sides. And until people do their homework, and you know this from your job, people have to look inside and find those shadow sides. And until we do that, living together in a utopian community it'll have moments of great light, and the shadow side will be exposed because the light exposes the dark. That's the way it works here.
No, that's true. So yes, expose the dark. It truly does. It truly does.
Yeah. So I don't really have, for a support group, what I'd have to say is we built a group of friends. Building the boat, we had our group of friends. I still have close girlfriends that I speak with when things get tough. I call them up and have a heart-to-heart, and we have a promise to each other to be brutally honest. If I'm in my stuff and I'm blaming someone or I'm not taking responsibility, my friends will call me on it, and I will call them on it, because we have that commitment to our freedom. And that's really important. And other resilience things would be having a spiritual practice like my meditation, listening to people who speak the truth that are inspiring, like your podcast, for example. You are encouraging people that have a lot of light to speak out. That's important. That's vitamins for my soul. It really is. And yeah.
Now, I want to speak to that light and dark when you said that light pushes out darkness, because what people don't understand, that is so true. Because if you have light, right, lots of light, but if you have just a little bit of darkness, there's still light. A little bit of darkness does not snuff out light, right? But
no.
If you have darkness and you have just a little bit of light, then the light takes over the darkness immediately. Even just a tiny, tiny bit of light takes over the darkness. I mean,
it can light a whole room.
Yeah,
it can light a whole room.
Yes, just a little bit.
It can light a whole room.
Just a little bit of light, right? But if you have a little bit of darkness in a certain area, it doesn't take away the light. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So that's phenomenal.
Great reminder. Wonderful reminder. Thank you.
Now, you are someone who has worked in both healthcare and education, which are both fields that are very service oriented, and it offers a lot of difficult times for people, right? Because sometimes the intention doesn't always match the outcome. especially in healthcare and education. And there's a lot of issues as far as funding and, how to pay for healthcare, how to pay for things in education. And so how, being involved in these two professions, do you think that they influence your understanding of resilience?
I do, absolutely. And I think it's been wonderful to be able to participate in both of those professions. First of all, they're both giving back to people, which is important to me. I worked as an accountant to get through school, and I have to tell you, it's really nice when all the numbers line up and everything, but it's so dry when you're not dealing with people.
Yeah, yeah. The numbers
I really need to.
They don't interact with you.
No, and they help me pay my bills, but there's something so wonderful to have interaction with people. And your question, there's two parts to this, because being a professional in both of those professions, it affects me personally. But also professionally, watching my students or watching my patients, I've learned by all the different ways that they respond to their, life jacks, and me having to be with them at those times. So there's two ways to answer your question. And I have to say that personally, it really gave me impetus always. It gives me impetus to keep doing my homework, to keep learning, to keep my mind open, to not judge, because there's so much going on under the surface when you're interacting with people, whether as a dental hygienist or as a professor at the college. People have so much going on, especially now. And you could be saying something simple like, floss your teeth more, and they'll flip out. But it's not necessarily because of what you said. It's because of all the things in life. And if I'm not sensitive to that,
it's the judgment, right? Like, it's
Yeah. And if I'm not sensitive to that, then I'm not being a very caring healthcare worker. I'm not being empathetic. I'm not being available. And then whatever healing needs to happen gets, curtailed quite a bit. And same with education. If I'm in my story about what happened to me that day, and a student is in their story about what happened to them, it's pretty hard to get any learning across.
Right?
Yeah, so it's a really good encouragement. I'm so grateful, because it's kept me my whole life really on the path to making sure that I'm paying attention inside and I'm doing my own work and being more available for what needs to happen in my responses to others.
Now, Deborah, I can't even believe that we've come to the end of this conversation, because it's just been such a pleasure to speak with you and for you to share your story on the show. But I have to ask you, as I ask all of my guests, about, building resilience. And what advice would you give to someone who is currently facing a significant life challenge and they're seeking to build resilience?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And when I look inside, when I was really in my dark nights of the soul, when it was really, really tough, advice doesn't work. Words, it's like people tell you things and you're just like, you can't hear. You're so covered over and looking for, a way through, and it just looks like a dead end and everything's dark. And in those moments, I would hope that people can find a friend or someone that can just sit with them. So in my working with people too, it's like, it's better sometimes if I don't talk, if I don't give advice, if I'm just able to be there with them and understand that sometimes words and any kind of ideas about what someone should do or shouldn't do is just not going to work. And what people really need is so much love and acceptance in those moments for them to help get through to the next step. So having said that, I'll also say that when you're in a really dark place, and this helped me a lot, was it'll change. I just had to tell myself it'll eventually change. It'll be like this forever, even though it feels like it's forever. So I would tell myself that. And then when you're in a little bit of a better space, for me, it's always remembering a really big picture that, our life is huge and our universe is huge. And the lifetime that we're in now is like a blink of an eye. And I think that's written in holy books all over the place. And yet, even though it's a blink of an eye, our time here is important and special. Like, about a hologram. If you take a postcard that's a hologram, if you take one little, clipping off it, like a millimeter by a millimeter, and you look at that hologram, it has the whole postcard in that little tiny bit that you tore off the corner. So I think that we're like that in this world. We're small, and the world is huge, and life is huge, but we're significant. And somehow remembering that helps me to not take myself as seriously sometimes, to just go, okay, this is one of those bumps in the road, hang in there and let's see what unfolds. Let's see what's next. And remember that you're loved. You are loved. You are so loved.
Wow. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing your inspiring journey with me and the listeners today on Life Jack the Resilience podcast. I mean, your story is a powerful reminder that even in the face of profound change and disillusionment, we can find the strength to rebuild and reimagine our lives. I mean, your insights on creativity, nature, and spiritual discernment, because you brought that up when you were talking about freedom and, recognizing that you must have discernment even within that freedom. I mean, it offers valuable guidance for anyone seeking resilience in their own journey. So how can listeners find and connect with you or purchase your memoir, Grit and Grace, The Transformation of a Ship and a Soul?
Yes, I have a website. It's DeborahRudell.com, and it's also going to be available on Amazon and the usual book places. And it's being released on the 27th of February. However, my book launch is on the 23rd of February at Camino Books in Del Mar, so everyone's invited.
Do you have any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
Yes, I do have a story. It's not a long story. Do I have time for that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Thich Nhat Hanh, I think your listeners may be aware of who he was and is, the Buddhist teacher. And he told a story, and this story really helped me in my darkest time. So I kind of wanted to share that. And the story is that if you can imagine that the whole earth is covered in water, the whole thing. There's no land anywhere. And on the whole earth, there's one life preserver, just one. That's all the oceans, the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, everywhere, all water, and only one life preserver. And Thich Nhat Hanh told the story, having a chance to have life on this earth is the same as the chance of being swimming in that ocean of the whole earth and having your head come up in that life preserver. And to me, that when I heard that story, it made me honor my life and know it for such a precious opportunity and a precious experience. So no matter how dark it got, I would remember that story and remind myself of this precious, really amazing, wonderful light experience that I'm able to have on this earth at this time.
Wow, that's just remarkable. Remarkable. Deborah, I appreciate your insights on building resilience and for lighting the way with your courage and wisdom. So listeners out there, I hope that you get a copy of Deborah's memoir, Grit and Grace, The Transformation of a Ship and a Soul. I hope that it will have a profound impact on the people who read it. I wish you and your family nothing but blessings and abundance. Please take care.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you and an honor. Blessings to you and your family and all your listeners as well.
Deborah Rudell, everyone. Be sure to join me next time for more uplifting stories and insights on resilience. Until then, keep pushing forward, embrace the journey, and remember that every setback can lead to a greater comeback. Dr. Rowe, signing off.